COVID-19 spikes in Texas and Florida, turning up the pressure for another lockdown in those states. But my next guest, Senator Rand Paul, blasting that idea, calling it, quote, a big mistake, saying the first wave of shutdowns didn't do much to stop the pandemic, that it just crippled the economy instead. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, joins us now. Good morning. Why do you say it was a big mistake?
Well, I think what you found in New York is that we ended up having a horrendous death. We had 30-some-odd thousand people die. Their death rate is about 1,600 per million, the highest in the country, 8 times worse than Florida, 10 times worse than Texas, even now with the surge in Texas and Florida. So I don't think there's a lot in New York that we can look to and say, oh, that's what we should model after. In fact, I really think Governor Cuomo ought to be impeached for the worst public policy, public health decision, maybe in a century, sending patients with coronavirus back to nursing homes. So I don't think there's anything to be lauded up there. But I think the one story people are missing is, amidst this resurgence or surge in the disease, New York has very few deaths and very few new cases. Has nothing to do with the lockdown. I believe that it has a great deal to do with the level of immunity they've achieved. I think about 25% or so of New York City is now immune, and I think that is slowing down the progress of the disease. I think it has little to do with human or government behavior, but it has a lot to do with immunity. Stockholm is about the same in Sweden, and so you have northern Italy is about the same. Areas where you've had this great rise in cases, a lot of deaths, actually achieve a certain amount of immunity, and I think are going to be suffering a lot less. Unfortunately, until we have a vaccine, Florida and Texas death rates will continue, but it's important to keep it in perspective that they're about 10 times better than New York State.
But Senator, you're not arguing for herd immunity in these places where it's out of control, are you?
I'm not saying we have a choice. All the things we do aren't stopping the virus, and it's impossible really to stop the virus and put it dead in its tracks. The virus has a mind of its own. It's a scourge of Mother Nature, and we do our best with it. But even when we try to do our best, even when we've locked everything down, it still leads to a mountain of dead people. That's what happened in New York. And what I'm saying is that while we're not sort of advocating, hey, let's do nothing and get herd immunity is happening and happened in New York, and I think we've actually achieved it, but we've achieved it at a much smaller number than the theoretical predictions. The theoretical predictions based on random behavior of a random mathematical model say you need 60 to 70%. There are people now looking at that and putting in the factor of human behavior and that people don't all react and behave the same in public as far as their contacts, and showing that a lot of viruses in the past, we've achieved a form of immunity where the virus slows down and goes away at a much lower percentage, maybe 20 to 25%. We've had other attacks. We've had pandemics in the 60s and the 50s, and even going back to the Spanish flu, where the virus doesn't get 60 to 70% of the world infected. It gets closer to 20 to 25%, and then there's enough immunity that the spread of the virus slows down. And that's what my hope is. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you that's for sure, but I can tell you that we ought to at least offer that is an opinion out there, and there's at least evidence from New York that looks like they're not being affected, and one of the most logical things is that they have some immunity build up that's slowing down the spread of the disease.
All right, here's Dr. Deborah Birx had her on special report last night. Take a listen.
This time we saw wide virus spread across counties, across rural areas, across small metros and big metros, all the way across the south, southwest, and west, almost simultaneously. So this was an event that we think can be traced to Memorial Day and opening up and people traveling again and being on vacations.
So are you saying that we really can't get a hold of this, and that, you know, all of the talk about increased testing and contact tracing, you're saying we're past that?
I think we have so many people getting infected and spread so far that we should try to do contact tracing. We should try to do quarantine. All of those are good things. It's probably beyond that where you're actually able to do contact tracing, and others are admitting to that we have such a large number. But I will say that there's contrary evidence that the reopening has caused this. The governor of Oklahoma was interviewed the other day and said he'd been open 86 days. They do have more cases now, but they've been open for 86 days. So I think there are arguments against opening being the real scourge of this. this, but that maybe travel has something to do with this. I think New York was inundated with international travels and probably were seeded with hundreds of positive people all in February. I think they said over 2 million people came internationally back to New York or through New York in February, including like 139,000 from Italy. So New York really got hit with a lot of, they didn't have patient zero, they had hundreds, if not thousands of patient zeros. But those people now, there's been travel throughout the United States, and probably New York has seeded the rest of the United States. And for a while, the rural states did very well just because we're already socially distanced. And I still think the rural states will do pretty well throughout all of this. But the bigger cities in the South now are suffering the way New York City did. But the good thing is that I think the governors in Texas and Florida and the doctors are much wiser than they were, and hopefully won't do as terrible a job as Governor Cuomo did with his
well, last thing quickly
there.
on that, it's fairly rare for a senator from Kentucky to call for the impeachment of a governor in New York.
Yep, it is rare, only when they deserve it, and actually Cuomo does deserve it. I think his sanctimonious presentations of all the things he's going to do through Big Brother to make us safe again, when what he did was the one public policy decision he had, the ability to try to make it better, he made it hugely worse by sending people with coronavirus back to nursing homes. Almost half the people who died in New Jersey and New York died because of that public policy decision and died in nursing homes. So we have learned to not, and they're not doing that in Florida. I think from the beginning, the governor of Florida did not do that. He was wise enough to see that coming, and so we just shouldn't laud bad behavior, and that's my point. People can make mistakes, and Cuomo's human, but we shouldn't be out there lauding New York, and that's where Dr. Fauci makes a big mistake, saying, oh, New York is what we're after. Well, only if you want 1,600 dead people per million, the highest in the world, not just the highest in the U.S. New York has a higher death rate than any place in the world. That is not to be admired and not to be emulated.
Senator Rand Paul up on Capitol Hill. Senator, thanks for the time.
Thank you.